Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today I wanted to talk about my commentary on self-inserts. And this isn't like a ding at the people that do self-inserts, but I wanted to talk about some of the difficulties that come with like writing a self-insert and then inserting it into the market as a literary work. And some of these issues also come out when you're actually dealing with critiques. So I wanted to talk about that and get some of your guys' opinions on the subject itself. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, and if you want more, like, share, and subscribe, and bring your comments so that we can have some discussions. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the description down below where I've got Lamoy, the monthly prompt contest here, and I keep wanting to say Pitch Fit. And the Fresh Meat feature, where you send me your first chapter, I'll read it here, and hopefully readers will find new books to enjoy. This is where indie books go to live, okay? So, with that said, I want to preface this by saying this isn't a critique on creating self-inserts or writing self-insert stories, or if you enjoy those stories, or if you write those stories. These are just my observations or the things that I've specifically noticed when it comes to self-inserts and how it is more difficult to navigate commenting on self-insert content in the literary space if you're trying to be a professional. So always separate the personal fantasy, the hobbyist, and the person trying to be a literary professional. Now, there are two main types of self-inserts that we can talk about, and I do it with these quotation marks because the first type is more of it's a fiction meets nonfiction that is often seen in literary fiction more than in other genres. And this is where somebody will take like their life experiences that they've had and they'll create a fictionalized circumstance around it, or add a bunch of different fictionalized circumstances to real life experiences. And this is often done with traumatic experiences, with usually traumatic experiences, and big events that they might not be able to place into a full narrative without creating a fictional kind of stage for it to be in. And Lydia Yakunovic, on the Backs of Small Children, did this, and both of her books, if you read both of her books, or the critiques of both books, or reviews of both books, people mention that there are repeating circumstances or scenes in both of the books, and those are because those scenes are drawn out of her memory, and then she writes from her memories and from her experiences, but puts them in a fictional space. So this is super common with dealing with traumatic experiences, dealing with, say, if you were a war correspondent, and you wanted to put that into a story, but you had maybe difficulty approaching it, or you didn't have a full narrative idea that you could do for a nonfiction, or you wanted to add some fictional background to tie it together better, then you might use your personal experience to create this fiction and the stuff that you've lived through to create this fiction. And so that would technically be a self-insert, but not really in the same way, because you were using yourself as the character and then fictionalizing all this world around it. That is a completely separate thing from this other thing that I want to talk about, which is the more fantasy style self-insert. And by fantasy, I mean personal fantasy. Now, if I make reference to certain things, I'm not trying to say that those that do self-inserts are the same as serial killers, but I wanted to say the psychology here is very similar in that this is where you're going to get me. The psychology behind the serial killer in, like, with Wrestler, that Wrestler has talked about, that they talked about in Sexual Homicides, is that the people that escalate to serial killer for sexual pleasure spend a lot of time in their heads imagining things, and they create this whole fantasy world in which they control literally everything. And what usually follows is, when the destruction comes, is usually when the individual tries to bring their fantasy into real life. But that fantasy world is just their imagination of them living out whatever they want and creating the circumstances that they want in their head, and then trying to recreate those circumstances in real life. So, what I see in self-insert fiction is the most bare, straightforward version of somebody's personal self-fantasy, but it's being written on the page and shared with other people. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this. Like I said, we're not critiquing the idea about it specifically, but as a reader or a writer, as a writer putting that into the consumer market, and as a reader, me paying for it and picking it up and going through it, there are some things that make it more difficult. I am sorry that this guy is crooked. I don't know when that happened, but there are at least five big ways to recognize when a story is a self-insert story. Number one is everything goes the main character's way. So nothing happens to the main character that the author doesn't want to happen to the main character. So you'll see them make decisions that should have consequences, but those consequences don't come because those aren't the kinds of things that the author wants to happen to that character. If you remember, we're in a fantasy world, which means the only things that happen to that character are the things specifically plotted to be of benefit for that character in one way or another. The character is not allowed to act out, and if the character does act out, stuff is not allowed to go unexpected. It always has to be the expected outcome for the best benefit because it is so in control by the author. You know, think about if you're playing imaginary games in your head and you're determining where you're going to go next, either with your dolls or and you're playing pretend or whatever you're doing. If you are playing pretend, playing with your fantasies, creating what you want to do, it is always only going to go where you want it to go. And your partners in those imaginary scenes are always only going to do what you want them to do because you would never really imagine things happening to you that you don't want to happen. That's pretty much how fantasies work. That's why, you know, certain things in fantasy aren't really considered the same as criminal offenses because in those fantasies, you want it to happen to you with maybe that specific person. Whereas if it happened to you in real life, even if you had fantasies of those things, it's not the same circumstance because you didn't consent to that. But imagining with fantasy, you did consent to it. Anyway, so everything in the story typically goes the way that the author wants it to go. Sign number two is the main character is unabashedly OP. Like they beat everybody, they have all of the powers, they are the special one, maybe they are the 4 times special one, and it just compounds on how special and how powerful this character is. Building off of the unabashedly OP, another common sign of self-insert is that majority of the characters introduced that are opposite sex or the correct sex for the love interest are sexually interested in the main character. So like in His Name Was Augustin, you've got like literally all of the secondary male characters who are in love with Swanee. You've also got a random lesbian who is in love with Swanee because she is, in my opinion, that is a fantasy self-insert by the author. But that is just my guess based on what I'm seeing in there. I can't make any assumptions, but it is very, very common, especially that the villain wants to bang the main character. It makes it more dangerous. But if everybody adores that character for one reason or another, or most people adore that character, except for the ones that you're supposed to hate, and then those bitches just straight up hate the main character, it's probably a self-insert. That hatred is there to make you dislike that character because that character dislikes the main character, and you're supposed to like the main character, so if they're a bitch to her, then you're supposed to hate her. That's not really how it works most of the time, at least not for me, but there's that. Number 4, and I hate seeing this. Oh, I hate seeing this so much. When there's a big baddie, and everybody is warning character, hey, don't do this thing, don't talk back to this guy, he is scary, he will kill you if you talk back to him, just mind your manners, behave yourself. And so then the main character is brought in to go and talk to this big baddie, and this big baddie says something, and big baddie is being like, you know, the boss, and it's like, yeah, you're gonna do as I say, and you're gonna work for me, alright? And then the main character gets sassy. She gets sassy or she grows some balls and she snaps back at the boss. And so then the boss pretty much stands up. He looks all super serious. He's like, you know what? I really like you. I like the sass. Isn't this one just fire? It happens so much. I have seen it too many times where main character is just everybody defy the greatest power of them all, and they're all like, you are so sassy. You know that. You know that. I just like that little sassy hot rocket. Though that last guy, I cut his head off for saying exactly the same thing. But you know what? He's not main character. You can get away with it as main character. You hear me? So be as sassy as you like. In fact, I laugh even when you cry. Not because you're funny, just because you're a sassy little rocket. And okay, I like I like to see others in pain, but that's not why I laugh at you. Okay, look, truth be, I care about you. You're like first person I care about in 20 years, and if I see you cry, I'm actually going to have to kill somebody, whoever made you cry. Look, I'm not normally feel a person, but I feel for you for some reason. And I don't know why, other than you probably main character, and I'm supposed to like you because you are also self-insert, and everybody who aligns with you is just supposed to fall at your feet, and thus I fall at your feet. So, like, I freaking hate that so much. Oh my gosh. Can you tell? Okay. The fifth big thing, and it kind of is like the first one, but not, is that there are no consequences unless they make the main character look like either a victim or a martyr. Every consequence that happens to that main character has to then be used by the narrative to make them look righteous or holy or get the sympathy of those around them, including the reader, and that is all that is allowed to happen to them. Now, Joey, as an example, I don't think Joey gets any sympathy when she jumps out the window at the police department and gets herself murdered. I think everybody is like, Joey, you're so freaking stupid for doing that. How could you? But she's not a self-insert. So that's just the opposite of something of allowing something bad to happen to a character in order to try to squeeze sympathy out of the reader, or to be like, oh look, she can now use this, like, freaking, okay. I'm sorry, Augustine. We'll have to see once the book comes out, and then, like, since she's still writing it, maybe she'll change it by the time it comes out. But I've heard with the 5th book of His Name is Augustine that a bunch of her friends and family that she cares about are going to die as a result of her choices. So that actually just turns her into and she's supposed to be seen as the biggest victim because, oh, look, now all of her friends and family are gone. Look, I don't have any sympathy for Swanee. She's done a lot of terrible things, a lot of mean things, and I haven't even gotten to talk about them since I haven't really talked about book 3 and 4. But it's like saying man goes to war and dies, women most affected. No, I would say the guy that died is the most affected in this, and that is the biggest tragedy. But that's what I mean by bad things are only allowed to happen, consequences only happen to the main character if she can be treated as a victim or a martyr. So the same thing can be said with Swanee in book 3 when she miscarries Augustine's child. That's just so that she can be seen as a victim because she's also supposed to be marrying Joel, and she was going to lie to Joel that was his kid when it wasn't his kid. And now you're supposed to feel bad for her because she tricked somebody else into marrying her for her to have a position of power, and now she lost a child that she really, really wanted. I don't feel bad for her. She's just a liar and a user. Anyway. That's a big thing, because becoming a victim or a martyr kind of elevates status with readers artificially. If the book doesn't treat it as justified, then it's weird. Unless we're doing something where the psychology of the character is messed up and the character is an unreliable narrator, then there are all of these caveats. So that's not to say any of the above mentioned that's not to say that any of the previously mentioned pointers can never be done successfully and it not be a self-insert, but these are all ways in which you can usually tell that a character is a self-insert, and this is a self-insert fantasy of sorts. Now, where it gets really, really difficult specifically with self-inserts and self-insert stories is that very few people, and you know, this is an assumption on my part, so feel free to correct me, but very few people really want to read someone else's personal fantasy because there are no stakes. Like I said, if you are living out your fantasy and this is something to make you feel good and the things that you really like and you're that main character, you're not going to do anything to that character that's actually going to feel bad because this is a second life for you, the self-insert author. So that means that none of the stakes are real for those characters, or that anything bad will really happen to those characters. You're living out your fantasy where it's either sex or power or a taboo or a combination of many different things. Now, the worst part about the self-insert marketed fiction is that because the author so strongly identifies with the main character of that book that is basically them, then any critique of that main character immediately becomes personal. You can't say that that character is selfish because that is the author. And so the author will take you saying that character is selfish as you saying they are selfish. If it's a self-insert and you say that character is evil or mean or whatever, then the author will absorb those those critiques of the character into themselves. If you say anything about the character's love interests that is critical, because those characters are either the author's fantasies or they are based on real people that the author is in love with, then the author will take it personally that you were either critiquing their fantasy dream partners, or you're critiquing their for real love interests, and that's an insult in person. So it becomes almost impossible to truthfully discuss fiction that is based around self-inserts, because the authors will constantly be tempted to take everything you say as a personal attack on them when you're literally just talking about the fiction and it's got nothing to do with them. Then you end up with hurt feelings and you get into flame wars and somebody wants to start drama and you're like, bro, I was just trying to read this book. Please don't turn it into this thing. Critiques are hard enough as they are, and they will always hurt, but it hurts more when somebody connects personally with that main character and says, this is me, and now you are insulting me as a person by critiquing this book, this story, this fantasy, this love interest. So that's where it all gets difficult, and I don't really want to read or talk about books that are self-inserts generally because it leads to a bunch of drama. When you bring your fantasy drama into real life, I can't. People are angry and mean enough already, and so, enjoy your stories, enjoy your books, and I hope that we can get to a point where talking about books, talking about the weaknesses or the strengths of books are not seen as either complimentary to the author specifically or insults to the author specifically as a person. It's just talking about the content. So I hope none of that feels like a personal attack to anybody. I just wanted to mention this because it felt like something. And I wanted to have a discussion about self-inserts because these are my thoughts and just the analysis that I have and what I wanted to share with you guys about what I see and what I've seen and the some of the experiences that I've had. And so now I would love to know what some of yours are. Do you enjoy self-insert fiction, or have you noticed any of the problems I mentioned before in self-insert fiction? Do you have any positives or benefits of self-insert fiction that you would like to talk about? I mean, not everything about self-insert fiction is bad, because I think it gives you a place to start writing, it gives you a place to be creative, it gets you to be motivated and to play and experience things in your stories. It's just when you start pushing it into the market where you're asking people to pay and then you're taking it personally when somebody is like, I have a response though. That's where it starts getting into this. I don't want to fight with authors about our different approaches to things. Can we just... That may be an impossible order, but thank you for listening to me talk about this, and I look forward to your thoughts on self-inserts and self-insert fiction and any experiences you might have had with critiquing or reading a book that was a clear self-insert and what happened there. Oh, another example, just because of the self-insert, everybody's in love with them because it's relevant, in the Cyborg Tinkerer. Everybody thinks that Gwen is hot. She also, everything works out for her. She even gets beaten up and with batons, her ribs break, her legs break, and none of it matters. The consequences don't matter. It just makes her look like a victim because she was attacked by these people, but it also actually doesn't stop her from accomplishing any of her goals. So I could probably outline how most of these points I made earlier fit into the Cyborg Tinkerer somewhere. But that's as far as I'm going to go. I just wanted to give that other example because it's relevant. So, looking forward to your thoughts on the subject. Please don't get mad. I just want to facilitate conversation based on our experiences. No shade at anybody that does self-insert fiction. It's just really hard to critique. Yeah. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend and don't die. Please don't kill me.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?